We are not to the point to do animal health. We are still doing flock health. The people who are being counters in many of these companies don't understand about biosecurity and disease, and we need to team up with them. The biosecurity is an insurance to make sure that to minimize the effects of the disease.
Welcome to Unplucked, the official podcast of the Poultry Science Association. This is the podcast where we strip away the fluff and get real about poultry science from bench to barn. I'm your host, Andy Vance, Executive Director of the Poultry Science Association. In this episode of Unplucked, we explore how precision livestock management is transforming poultry health and disease prevention. From harnessing production data for smarter decision-making to developing new, non-invasive diagnostic tools, our guest is an expert with insights from more than 2 decades in avian pathology and field research. Joining us today is Dr. Rocio Crespo, Professor of Poultry Health and Pathobiology at the North Carolina State University's College of Veterinary Medicine. Dr. Crespo is a board-certified veterinarian with more than 25 years' experience specializing in precision livestock management, biosecurity, and developing non-invasive tools to monitor flock health. Her research bridges on-farm practice and basic foundational science to improve poultry health worldwide. Dr. Crespo, I want to start a little bit with your story. You've worked both in diagnostic labs, academic research, have this, as I mentioned, great wealth of practical experience. How have those different aspects of your story and your career shaped your view of the challenges we face in managing poultry health?
So I do see a great opportunity in diagnostic laboratories to collect a lot of data. And one of the things throughout the years, 20 years that I work in diagnostic labs, I noticed that many of the diseases that I was seeing are metabolic diseases, nutritional diseases. At the time when those birds come down to be diagnosed, it's a little bit too late to diagnose. So while we have been excellent about diagnosing infectious diseases, we are still a little bit behind about early diagnosis of nutritional deficiencies or metabolic problems. And that's when I say, well, we probably have to start looking into this more precision agriculture so we can start earlier, diagnose earlier, and manage the flocks in a way that we prevent the disease.
Yeah, I want to get into precision in a moment, but I want to dig into that a little bit. Your observation about we were a little late in making some of these diagnoses. As you were observing that, was that a function of just our ability to measure, to see what was going on in the bird? Was that we'd never thought to look into those things earlier in the cycle? What were you observing as maybe the underlying reasons why we were late to the party in trying to diagnose some of those metabolic issues you're describing?
So one of the things that I observe, or it's maybe my opinion, many of the infectious diseases or many of the pathogens that cause infectious disease, they depend on the immune system of the bird to be down. Many of those nutritional deficiencies or metabolic issues may also put stress on that immune system. So when the veterinarian comes, who is trained mostly on infectious diseases, and he says, here is E. coli or reovirus or whatever you name it, we don't even look beyond what are these birds having some other issue going on. We may see, for instance, in table egg layers, the soft shells, and we think is going to be bronchitis, and we check for bronchitis, but maybe we are not looking into calcium problems or the relation of different minerals. We may look just and focus very much into calcium, but we are not looking at other minerals, like maybe the relation with magnesium or phosphorus that they have with calcium as well. So we need to look into those more closely. Think about this. Almost about 10, 15 years ago, women, they were over 50, they suddenly, older women, they broke their hips. We knew they had osteoporosis. We knew women 10 years ago with osteoporosis after they broke their hips. And here it came more technology. And now, after 50, you start to look for loss of bone density. So we don't go into osteoporosis. We detect osteopenia. Birds in cage layers, we diagnose when the birds many times they go into cage layer fatigue, the equivalent to osteoporosis. The bones are very soft, the keel is rubbery, the ribs are just collapsed. We should be able to go back and start treating those birds before we go to that extreme on that flock. And they may come for other reason. We discover that they have those problems. Birds are not at the top of the pecking order, so they hide their clinical signs very well. And when they come with a different disease, that's when we discover. And by the way, they also have osteoporosis.
Makes a ton of sense. And we hosted a webinar earlier this year, and I thought it was great. I had one management extension expert on the panel and one veterinarian, and I enjoyed the comment from the veterinarian. And I'm gonna misquote this, but I think it hits at what you're saying. He said something to the effect of, when you walk through a house, 90% of the problems are management, and then 10% need a veterinarian. And then the percentage may be off there, but his point was most of the issues we see, kind of like what you're describing here, aren't the bug, the pathogen, whatnot. That maybe is the symptom that we found rather than the underlying cause. Is that a reasonable summary?
Yes, that's a reasonable summary of what I said. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it presents an opportunity. You mentioned precision, so I want to dig into that as an area of your expertise. You've advocated for precision livestock management as one of the ways we can dig into this. What's that look like in practice on a poultry farm today? How do you define precision livestock management as it relates to this conversation we're having?
We are very good and we have improved about ventilation, temperature, air quality. We are very good about even formulating diets. That's all about poultry science. But we are not looking at the bird. So what we do is we formulate a diet and we see how much weight they put. So the input will be the feed, the output will be either the weight or maybe the number of eggs. We are not looking what that diet is doing on the bird itself. We are skipping going to the output completely because that's where we are making the profit. We are not looking at the animal. I think we are probably missing some opportunities to improve because we really need to focus or investigate more what's happening in the animal. What is this feed doing to this animal? So things I've seen, for instance, with broilers, they grow so fast. I see not that the diets are low in calcium, but the blood cannot absorb everything. So if you do anything wrong or they have any disease where they cannot absorb, I see a little bit of imbalance between the total calcium and the phosphorus, which then it may be what I call it, I may be wrong, but I call it like a pre-rickets type of things. In older layers, in laying eggs, things that I've seen when they drop in egg production, I see the ionized calcium going slightly down.
Okay.
So ionized calcium is different from the total calcium. So the total calcium is everything, all the calcium that is in the blood. But the ionized calcium is that the one that can be used for the muscle contraction and everything is in the ion form. So the total calcium may be used for producing the eggs and to lay out bone. But the ionized calcium is when you have a twitch or something, they tell you it's just like that's the ionized calcium are low.
Mm-hmm.
So we are like, for instance, with ruminants, where you might heard of calcium tetany.
Mm-hmm.
Cows, because the pasture is low on calcium, when they go and give birth, they are lacking calcium, and the veterinarian goes, boom, gives a shot of calcium. We just wring the necks of those hens. We don't look into whether it's calcium or something else.
Right.
Do we know? We actually, with ruminants now, they go into herds, and before they become pregnant, they measure what are those levels in the blood. They do a metabolic profile.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have to supplement during pregnancy? We don't have problems with some of these minerals. We should actually go into the pullet house, and before they go into laying, what is the blood level? Because each flock is going to be different. They are exposed to different feed, to different diseases, to different management. So it will be a good idea to maybe like see what the metabolic profile is. Do we have to improve a little bit more? Do we have to change the magnesium? What do we do here to minimize that calcium tetany that we see? And the calcium tetany, we see it more in breeders, whether they are heavy breeders or they are turkey breeders. We are not seeing that much in of course, broilers. They are too young for that. The layers we don't see. We see more the osteoporosis portion.
You mentioned earlier, sometimes we'll jump straight ahead to just look at the output. What I'm wondering about is when we look at production data, how should we use production data to make better decisions when it comes to bird health and welfare? And what additional data, you talked about like some of the blood tests and coming up with a metabolic profile. How do we go about making sure we're using the right data or collecting the right data to make better management decisions with regard to health and welfare?
I would love to have like say, oh, we're going to measure this and that.
Sure.
We have to investigate what's the best. Like when I started, the ELISA test for blood to measure the antibodies for vaccination, it was just coming up. So most of the week that I had there, I am aging myself 25 years ago, that was mostly like either agglutination or microagglutination, or it was AGID, that's for agar immune diffusion. So we had those that were either positive, negative, or they were semi-quantitative. We didn't have anything like ELISA that is quantitative. We investigated a lot with ELISAs, and now we know how to use it better and when to use it. We have to go through a process, and it's going to be for a period when we are not seeing money coming back and saying, oh yeah, I am making more, obviously more eggs,
Sure.
because we are studying and trying to figure out which is the best measure. Is it the blood, or is it to measure like one of the things I am looking at too is I am using ultrasounds and I am using x-rays.
Yeah.
Can I put it in the house, or with what conditions? So there are things that we are investigating, learning more, because think about it. You go to the doctor or you take your dog or your cat to the vet, and the vet says, let's go and euthanize this animal and we'll figure out what the problem is.
Mhm.
So not only is the loss of that animal that maybe a small amount of money, but still is alive. And then what other tests? Technology is getting less expensive. We have to move with technology. When I was growing up, I wouldn't think about having my own cell phone. You remember the cell phones? Some of the listeners will remember the big cell phones that came, that they were almost like weapons that you
Yes.
use rather than anything like,
Yeah, club
I
a
am,
fellow with them
yeah,
from upside the head, blunt
like a brain
object.
that you throw it. I didn't want a cell phone. And now it's just like it's like another computer and I get it in my pocket. So technology is there. Technology is becoming less expensive. Let's go and start getting some basic numbers, how we can use it in our own benefit. Let's go and not say we have done it in this way 70 years ago. It's perfect. 70 years ago, we didn't have the technology we have today.
Sure.
So let's go and see what technology we can use today. You, for instance, and me too, we have a pen and a paper, and sometimes we scribble notes, we may write notes. But if you want to write an essay or a report for a client or an essay for a school or apply for a job, you are not going to write it by hand. You are going to use the computer and write a nice formatting. You are using the old maybe to get your own notes and then getting new applications. So this is what I am seeing. No, I am not in the way like let's go and replace completely what we were doing 100 years ago, 75 years ago, 50 years ago. They have the space, they have the way to do, but let's go and not just say this is how we were doing. Let's go and see, can we advance? Can we move forward with everything?
Well, I wanna get your perspective on another really, I think, important and rapidly evolving topic in poultry production, and that's biosecurity, global health. You've worked with some really serious diseases, avian influenza, Newcastle, and I'm curious what you've learned about the role biosecurity plays in preventing outbreaks, and how well are we doing as an industry at implementing what you think of as our maybe the best practices or the current science with regard to biosecurity and animal health.
I tell you, working with those viruses made me so humble. I have full respect on the viruses. Oh my goodness. Yes, they always change. They outsmart us many times. So full respect of the virus and the viral evolution. With biosecurity, I always say we have been excellent at diagnosing very early on. Now, with the current outbreak of high pathogen influenza, we are not moving the virus from farm to farm. So we have moved forward. Now, as you mentioned, how about the introduction? We still have many cases. They are separate introductions, but obviously we are not controlling the introduction on the farm. So on biosecurity, we still have a little bit extra work to do. One of the major concerns I have with biosecurity is we still do not know what is the most likely way some of these pathogens come inside the farm. So we talk about biosecurity as a blanket, but as broiler breeders, primary breeders, or broilers, biosecurity is very different
Sure.
and how they approach biosecurity. We cannot have biosecurity at the level of the primary breeder because our animal is actually much less expensive. The broiler price is lower. So if you are going to put the biosecurity at the level of the primary breeder, it's almost like if you have a small Toyota Tercel or a Honda Civic, and you are paying insurance as if you had a Rolls Royce. So the biosecurity is an insurance. Not that you are not going to have a disease, but to make sure that to minimize the effects of the disease. So we need, when we are studying biosecurity, also measure the economic cost of biosecurity. We talk about biosecurity and you change boots and you change PPE, all these things. But what exactly, where do I spend the money that I am going to have more prevention? Because of my region, I have more problem because of high pathogen influenza, or maybe at time of the year with avian influenza, and other times I don't have that much of a problem. I have other things. So we have to start thinking not just about biosecurity itself, but also give a price. And I think the people who are being counters in many of these companies don't understand about biosecurity and disease, and we need to team up with them to create us some of this modeling to how much it costs to have the PPE, or do we do training, or at what level I do the training? Is it to the people who are looking after the birds, or how you submit animals to the necropsy? I don't know. We need to do a little bit more tailoring rather than say biosecurity.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be different on your farm or my farm, because I may fail that I leave the carcasses and I put it in a bin and I don't cover
Yeah.
the bin, for instance.
Sure.
We need to start looking a little bit more prices and be more customized about biosecurity in. And I don't see, maybe because many of the news I receive is from the web and everything. I don't go into the specifics of each farm, but in general, when I see it, is I almost hear the same thing, and it's like I would like to see it, to hear a little bit more customized or tailoring the needs of the farm rather than just a generic biosecurity talk.
Yeah, every farm's different in some aspect, right? Whether it's the facility or the management, the labor, the need. Yeah, great observations. I'm thinking back, Professor, to something we were talking about earlier when we were still conversing about precision. And you talked about the technologies and the availability of things like ultrasound and X-ray versus drawing blood. And one of your areas of research is developing these non-invasive or minimally invasive methods to monitor health. I had an experience this week. I was donating blood. Normally, when you go to give blood, they prick your finger to check your hemoglobin levels, and I always think that's the worst part of giving blood. This time when I went, they had a little cuff they put on my thumb that somehow using infrared measured the hemoglobin level in my blood without ever pricking my finger. What's this look like in birds when you're talking about developing non-invasive or minimally invasive methods to monitor flock health? What are you looking into, and what kind of fascinating new tools or applications are out there to maybe give us some hope for interesting things in the future?
Oh, I would love looking into that. One of the major handicaps for us with poultry is how fast these birds grow. So it will be easier to measure in adult birds, like whether it's breeders or table leg layers, because they just don't grow. So you can actually apply some of these wearables on those animals. And then maybe when they go to the feeder, they can do the reading, and it measures the heartbeat and all this. They are many wearables in humans right now that they measure sugar levels. They measure some of the oxygen levels. I think we should be able to have some of those wearables now. One of the issues I have when I look into those wearables is they are made for humans. One of the things, for instance, I would like to measure like temperature sometimes. And we know as soon as we hold the bird, the temperature jumps up. So it's hard to measure temperatures. We talk about anything that is under 99 degrees Fahrenheit is a problem because that animal cannot control its body temperature. So I would like to have like maybe some wearable that I can measure constantly that temperature. Right now the technology is expensive, but also we are doing flock health. We are not to the point to do animal health. We are still doing flock health. So we talk about, I want to check the status of the flock in general, how many animals. So when I explain to my students whether you are going to get a sample that is randomized sample or target sample, what are you looking for? Are you looking for see what the flock is like, or are you looking for a specific disease? So if you are looking for just the general health status of the flock, you are going to do a random sample. So we may be like, say, okay, do we put some of these wearables, say, in 50 birds and get the data from these 50 birds? And this is the first step. I am actually working with agricultural engineers. I love working with engineers because they do all these
Yeah.
fun things. So things we are looking is gases in the air, because if you have diarrhea, the stools don't smell the same as when you have normal stools. So we are trying to measure the gases. Another thing we are looking, I am doing it mainly with turkeys because they are so vocal. They talk to you so much. And I am recording sound. And we know we are going to infect these birds. So we know when they are healthy, and when we infect them, they are going to be sick. So I am just looking forward how we can see, we can hear that sound, and can we then detect it when they start being sick. We are using cameras right now, similar to what you use in the football field, the spider camera, and sees all the football players. So we are running those cameras in broiler houses to see when are they eating, what are they drinking, what are they doing. So it will be an easier way to monitor things, like even if we were in broiler breeders and we are going to do like a vaccine in the water, can we monitor how many birds are getting the vaccine? What are the behaviors we do? Even with broiler breeders, we may either have like the skip a day, or how much we control their feed that they eat. At what time of the day is better to feed them? When are they more prone to feed, or are we disrupting by doing it at this time, or 2 hours after the sun rises, or when it will be better to do? So those things I am trying a little bit of behavior, but at the same time trying to see how there is not so much competition, reduces stress, fun things like that. That's what I am doing.
Well, one of the things I love about your story and your research is that really collaborative, innovative, interdisciplinary nature. You've talked about working with the bean counters, you've talked about working with the engineers, and bringing all of those different perspectives to the table, I think is important. And so that's what I want to ask you about next. Is you look at this maybe as a scientist, you're very rigorous animal health focus, you're thinking about the biology of the bird and all these things. How do you balance that and the science with some of those practical issues you talked about, like the cost implications on a farm and broilers versus primary breeders versus broiler breeders? And then likewise, when you're dealing with the engineers, of the realities of cost or size of components and batteries and wearables and all of that. How do you get all of those things to come together in a way that maybe moves the needs of the industry forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in research, we don't really care so much about the cost. You have the basic research, what you are really investigating. Is this worth pursuing? Sometimes we don't have the technology today, but someone may look into it and then technology catches up. For instance, I am working for probably the company Targan, which produces the wing scan for sexing the birds. Many years ago, we were developing rather than vent sexing, we decided to go for wing sexing. And when people started to do the wing sexing, we selected the males and females with different primary feathers so we can separate them. But of course, the labor is still expensive. So most people still didn't separate houses for broilers for female and male broilers. Now the technology is catching up with the artificial intelligence and images and analysis. And WinScan has been able to get that technology and say, okay, now we as they go down the ramp, we can photograph them and we can determine if they are males or females.
Mm-hmm.
So the basic research happened many years ago, and it was not the veterinarian, it was the geneticists that decided, let's go and see if we can separate in a different way that is not the vent. That's a great idea, but it costs a lot of money. But now technology is catching up and we are able to apply. So it has been how many years? Like 20, 30 years in the make. So sometimes what the scientists' crazy ideas today, maybe in 30 years, they have an application. I read somewhere that many of the research, the basic research, whether it's protein based or some of the genetic things that we do, all these what we call basic research, do have an application later on. Like 90% of those research are eventually used and applied in science.
That's such a great perspective, Professor. I love that because I think, especially for those of us listening to this who maybe aren't steeped in basic foundational science, it's easy to say, okay, that's great, Professor, but tell me how this makes money on the farm. It's easy or maybe attractive to get into that. I love the way you set that up because we may not always realize what the payoff is down the line if it's 20, 30 years down the way, but somebody had to do that research or we would have never gotten to whatever that end result is. One of my favorite questions to ask as we wind up our conversation, well, you really got me thinking about a lot of different areas here. I always like to ask guests what I call the crystal ball question. So I want you to pull out your crystal ball. Let's pretend that you are talking to maybe graduate students, maybe early career veterinarians interested in poultry. As you look in the crystal ball for the next 10 years, what areas do you think hold the most promise? Where would you encourage a young practicing veterinarian, a young research veterinarian, a young graduate student to think about as you see, hey, these are the things that are going to be really important over the next decade?
So things that are because we have fewer people in the population involved in farming. They
Hmm.
don't understand. And we do have, of course, people living in the cities. They are asking more transparency from these farms.
Hmm.
So welfare is going to be an issue that is going to continue, it's not going to disappear. Welfare is going to continue. We need to develop tools to actually objectively measure things on welfare. Doesn't mean it's the space or is that they jump up and down. It may be other measures as well we have to measure. Like, for instance, I mentioned earlier in our conversation about the phosphorus calcium in the broilers. We don't normally take the blood, but if I take the blood, it's like, am I really getting a true healthy animal? Is passing my welfare standards, but is that what they are going to ask in the future, or are they going to ask more grainy stuff? And it's like the same as you go to the doctor and they don't just do a physical exam. They say, okay, let's go and get some blood tests done. So maybe that's what they are going to ask from our flocks soon. It's like, okay, now we know that the flock is behaving, your mortality is right, the ventilation is perfect. Well, let's go and see if those birds are really as healthy as you think they are. So that's one of the things I see, that they may be more into that area. We do have more equipment that can be moved on the farm. That's my area of research there.
Yeah.
I do see a lot of maybe even for nutrition and developing areas. So all these technology, they are going to be like micronutrients and then microencapsulation. That will help a lot. So microencapsulation, I think that will be an area for those nutritionists and immunologists to come. How are we going to deliver vaccines? Are we going to get better methods? Right now, the mass vaccination by spray, we don't cover all the birds. And even if we cover all the birds, are they getting the right amount of the vaccine? We measure the antibodies still, so we know they have some antibodies, but can we get a better way of delivering the vaccines? Those technologies, I think they will advance more. I do think we need more on numbers and modeling,
Mm-hmm.
just because that data that is coming and we have to compare all that data. So those areas will be important.
Yeah, what a great bit of insight. And I think one that's really important for us to think about. I love that perspective and your observations about the ever changing needs, requirements, things that people want for us, good insights for all of us, regardless. I set that up as something for young people or young professionals, but I think really good for all of us. Dr. Rocio Crespo, North Carolina State University, a longtime contributor to the Poultry Science Association, presents at our conferences regularly, and you can see why. A wealth of great insight and information. Appreciate you joining us. And friends, if you're interested in some of the topics that we discussed in this episode, I might encourage you to listen to a few episodes that we did on those topics earlier this year. If you're interested in learning more about precision poultry management in the nutrition space, we talked to Dr. Martin Zudoff June 18th. Great episode on the implications of precision poultry nutrition. We talked also about some of the technologies from the engineering aspects. Couple of interviews with engineers in our space. October 8th, we talked about AI and robotics, maybe on the processing side. But then earlier this year, March 26th, we had a great episode talking about smart farms and the role that automation might play in the broiler house as well. Would encourage you to go back and listen to those episodes. You probably picked up on this. We are a weekly episode. If you're not already subscribing, click the subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you're so inclined, if you thought this was an interesting conversation, give us a rating because it helps surface the podcast for other would-be listeners. One favor I have to ask of you, it is membership season. If you haven't yet renewed your membership into the Poultry Science Association, do that at poultryscience.org. If you're saying, but Andy, I'm not already a member, you can take care of that at poultryscience.org as well. Go ahead and sign up. It's the best deal in town and get you access to a great community of professionals and experts, good networking opportunities throughout the year at our various conferences, events, meetings, and so on. Lastly, if you are looking to add some help to your team, you can do that by posting your job at our career page, careers.poultryscience.org. Or if you are in the market for a new opportunity, you can find great opportunities at a variety of both research, academic, and industry type positions available at careers.poultryscience.org. This episode was produced by Lindsay Johnston with editing and engineering by Mike Lunt of Parasol. For the Poultry Science Association, I'm Andy Vance. See you next week.